Hello and welcome to this Blender beginner tutorial. Today we're going to model this cube Bomb-Omb from Super Mario step by step. I guide you through the entire process from shaping the body to adding details like the fuse, wind-up key and feet. By the end you'll have a fully modeled and colored Bomb-Omb ready for rendering. So let's jump right in and get started. Alright, before we jump in, I've turned on screencast keys in the bottom left, this way you can see exactly what I'm pressing as we go along. First we model the body. Press Shift A, go to Mesh and select the UV sphere. Move it up by pressing G, then Z and position it slightly above the ground. Now switch to Edit mode by pressing Tab. Press 1 to enter vertex select mode and select the top vertex. Hold Shift Alt and left click to select the two loops around it. To shape the top part, press E to extrude. When you're happy with the length, go to front view by pressing numpad 1. Flatten the top by scaling only on the Z axis by pressing S, Z and 0. Move it down a bit for better proportions. Next, let's smooth things out by adding a subdivision surface modifier. You can add it on the right hand side. Set the levels to 2 so it has a rounder look. To sharpen the edges, go back into edit mode and select the top edge loop by pressing Alt left click. Go into wireframe mode to select the bottom edge loop by pressing Alt Shift left click. After you selected both loops, press Ctrl B to add a bevel. Use the mouse wheel to increase the segments. 3 should be fine. Finally, let's make it smooth. Right click the object and select Shade Smooth. That's the base of our Bomb-Omb's body. Let's move on to the next step. In the next step we're going to create the fuse of the model. First go into edit mode and switch to vertex select mode by pressing 1. Now select the top vertex and press Shift S cursor to select it. This moves the 3D cursor to the top of the body, making it easier to align everything properly. Back in object mode, add a curve. Press Shift A, Curves, and go to NURBS Curve. Go into edit mode to adjust the shape. Make sure to stay in edit mode so that the origin of the object stays in the middle. Then move the curve to the center and rotate it. Press R, Y and 90 to rotate it on the Y axis, making it stand upright. Then press R, Z and 90 to rotate it on the Z axis and align it properly afterwards. Now switch to front view with numpad 1. After that we will adjust the curve by moving the vertices around. You can shape the fuse however you like. I personally like to give it a more rounder approach. Once you're happy with the shape, you can move the 3D cursor back to the word origin with Shift C. After that, go to the Object Data Properties on the right panel. Under Geometry, go to Bevel and then increase the depth to give it some thickness. Adjust the shape again until you're satisfied. When the fuse looks good to you, convert the curve into a mesh. You can do that in object mode by pressing right click and select Convert to Mesh. Now go into edit mode and with Alt left click select the front edge loop. Move it slightly outward, then press F to fill the face. To make the front part round, press Ctrl B to add a bevel. Use the mouse wheel to increase the segments for a smoother look. And there we go, the fuse is in place. Let's move on to the next part. For the next part we will give our Bomb-Omb some eyes. First go into edit mode, select the vertex on the front of the body and press Shift S cursor to select it. This moves the 3D cursor to that spot so the eye will be placed correctly. Now switch back to object mode and create a UV sphere. Press S to scale it down, then adjust its proportions. Scale it smaller on the Y axis by pressing S, Y and shrinking it. Scale it taller on the Z axis with SZ to switch it vertically. Next, let's mirror the eyes to the other side. Add a mirror modifier on the right hand side. Set the body as the mirror object and make sure it mirrors on the correct axis. To smooth things out, add the subdivision surface modifier with Ctrl 2. As you can see, this gives it 2 levels of subdivision. Now just tweak the shape a bit more and move the eyes around until you're happy with the placement. You can do that by scaling, rotating and moving the object around. And that's it for the eyes. Let's move on to the next step. Alright, now let's model the shoes. To keep things clean, let's hide everything else for now. Press A to select everything, then press H to hide it. Now let's create the base shape. Press Shift A, go to Mesh and select Cube. Jump into Edit mode with Tab, then switch to Face Select by pressing 3. Select the front face and extrude forward by pressing E. Press Ctrl R to add a loop cut, then slide it towards the back to define the overall shape. Switch to Edge Select mode with 2, select the top edge and move it up along the Z-axis. Add another loop cut in the middle to give it more geometry to work with. Slightly pull the front middle edge outward on the Y-axis to round out the shape. Now let's make the shoe look smoother. Switch back to Object mode and press Ctrl 2 to add a subdivision surface modifier. First select the front faces and scale them on the X-axis to make the front part wider. Then move the top edge up again to refine the shape. Finally, add another loop cut across the middle with Ctrl R. Move it down slightly to flatten the shoe a bit. If everything looks good, right click and select Shade Smooth for a nice clean look. Now let's bring back the rest of our model again. Press Alt H to unhide everything. Scale down the shoe to match the character's proportions. Then move it to the side and rotate it on the Z-axis until it sits at the right angle. Tweak the proportions of the shoe again by scaling it and then move it up on the Z-axis so the shoe sits above the ground. For the legs we'll use a simple cylinder. Press Shift A and go to Mesh and select Cylinder. In the cylinder options at the bottom left, reduce the vertex count to 16 since it doesn't need much detail. Scale it down on the X and Y axis by pressing Shift Z to avoid affecting the height. Then make it shorter on the Z axis by pressing SZ. To position the legs perfectly on the shoe, move the 3D cursor to the back of the shoe by selecting a face and pressing Shift S cursor to select it. Then select the leg and snap it to the position with Shift S selection to cursor. Move the leg up and adjust the proportions to match the character. If needed, you can move down the base mesh. Scale the leg a bit more with Shift Z until you're satisfied with the shape. Then move the cursor back into the middle with Shift C. You can add smoothness by right clicking and Shade Smooth. Now we just need to mirror everything to the other side. Add a mirror modifier to both the shoe and leg. Set the body as the mirror object. Make any final adjustments if needed. And there we go, the shoes and legs are done. Now let's move on to the next part. Alright, now let's create the wind-up key. First go into Edit mode, select the back vertex of the body and move the 3D cursor to that position with Shift S cursor to select it. Now let's add a cylinder by pressing Shift A, Mesh and Cylinder. Rotate it on the X-axis by 90 degrees and scale it down so it fits nicely with the body. After that, jump into Edit mode and select the top face of the cylinder. Press E to extrude, but cancel it by right clicking. Now scale it up in all directions except the Y-axis by pressing S, Shift and Y. Next we extrude again with E to extend the shape a bit more. Then bevel the top face by pressing Ctrl B to make it rounder. Scroll up to add more segments for a smoother look. To sharpen the back edges, select them with Alt Shift left click and apply a slightly bevel with Ctrl B. Then press Ctrl 2 to add the subdivision surface modifier for a rounder appearance. Now switch to wireframe mode and tweak the proportions by adjusting the top part of the key back and forth until it looks right. When you're done, go back to solid mode. Let's continue by adding the actual key loops. Create another cylinder with Shift-A mesh cylinder and rotate it on the y-axis by 90 degrees and scale it down. Move it slightly to the side and up, then scale it further on the x-axis. To shape the key properly, switch the side view with numpad 3. Scale the cylinder on the y-axis and z-axis by pressing S-Shift-X to keep it from scaling on the x-axis. Now add a loop cut in the middle with Ctrl-R. Then select the side face and press X to delete half of the mesh. Apply a mirror modifier on the X and Y axis and use the base of the key as the mirror object. Adjust the position of the key in side view until it looks right. Let's go and connect both cylinders. Go into edit mode and delete half of the bottom faces using face select mode by pressing 3 and X to delete. Switch to edge select mode by pressing 2, then hold Alt left click to select the entire edge loop. Now extrude the edges downward to connect both key loops and create a solid shape. Before moving on, make sure that clipping is enabled in the mirror modifier. This ensures that the edges merge properly at the center, preventing any unwanted gaps. Now go back into wireframe mode and move the key down slightly on the Z-axis to refine the shape. To create the hollow center, first select the round face in the middle. Press I to insert it slightly, then delete it by pressing X and choosing faces. Next, hold Alt left click to select the inner edge loop, then extrude inward along the X-axis by pressing EX. This will create the hollowed out shape for the key. To add more details, start by inserting a loop cut in the middle by pressing Ctrl-R. Move it outward along the X-axis to give the key a rounder shape. Next, add another loop cut in the middle to increase the geometry, which will help smooth out the overall look of the key. Now let's fine-tune the shape using proportional editing. Press O on your keyboard or click the icon at the top to enable it. After enabling it, move the front vertices around. At first you might not see any changes, but if you scroll up or down, you'll see a circle appear. The bigger the circle, the more surrounding vertices will be affected when you move or scale. Move the middle section slightly on the y-axis to make it longer, but avoid affecting the hollow center. Do the same for the sides, moving them on the x-axis to make the key wider. Select the center vertex that connects the two loops and slightly move it outward on the y-axis. Keep the proportional editing fall off small here. Once the shape looks good, turn off proportional editing with O and make some final tweaks. For the finishing touches, start by adding a subdivision surface modifier by pressing Ctrl 2. Then right click the model and select Shade Smooth for a cleaner look. Next, move the key into the base, making sure it sits properly. Once you are happy with the placement, apply the mirror modifier on the right hand side. Then right click the object, select Set Origin, Origin to Geometry. This will make scaling and adjustments much easier since the origin is in the middle of the object. Finally, tweak the scale and position of the key until it looks just right. And that's it for the modeling process. In the next section, we'll bring our model to life by adding colors. Okay, let's add some colors to our model. Select the body and go to Material Properties tab on the right side. Click New and name it Body. You can adjust the color later on. Now we need to separate the top part of the body for a different material. Click the plus icon to add a second material slot. Next, go into edit mode by pressing Tab and select the top part by selecting the top vertex. Then press Ctrl numpad plus a few times to grow the selection. In the Materials tab, click New, name it Top Base and hit Assign to apply it to the selected area. Let's switch to the Shading tab at the top. Here we can add realistic materials and match colors more accurately. Here under the drop-down menu, select the base material. On the left side, open a reference image of Bomb-Omb. You can just grab one from Google if you don't have one. Now click on base color and use the eyedropper tool to pick the right color from the reference image. To make it look more like metal, set the metallic value to 0.6 and lower the roughness to give it that shiny look. Adjust the colors until they closely match the reference, but be careful not to make the metallic effect too realistic since it's a cartoon style character. Now do the same for the top base material. Make sure the metallic and roughness values match so everything looks consistent. When you're satisfied, move on to the eyes. Select the eyes and create a new material. Keep the base color white and lower the roughness to make them more reflective. For the views, we'll create a cool gradient effect. Select the views and create a new material. Press Shift A and search for color ramp and add it. Press Shift A again and search for gradient texture and connect it to the color ramp. Now press Ctrl T to add a mapping node and a texture coordinate node. If you don't have the Node Wrangler add-on enabled, you can just simply add the nodes with Shift A and search for them. When done, change the mapping vector from generator to object. Then flip the black and white values of the color ramp. Now click the plus icon in the color ramp to add another color stub. Set one color to black, the next one to red for the burning part, and add another stop and set it to dark gray to create an ashy fading effect. Fine-tune the colors until they look just right to you. Maybe you prefer a fuse that's almost completely burnt down or just slightly signed. It's all about personal preference. When it comes to coloring, there's no right or wrong, just what looks good to you. When you are done, we will continue with the feet and legs. For the feet, select them and add a new material. Use the eyedropper tool to match the color from the reference image. Then adjust the roughness slightly to make it feel more like a soft material. When done, select the legs and assign the same material to keep it consistent. Adjust the base color again until you're satisfied. Now select the wind-up key and create a new material. Set the base color to warm and golden yellow. Then increase the metallic value and lower the roughness to give it that shiny metallic look. Just be careful not to make it too realistic. We're going for a clean, stylized feel that fits the cartoon aesthetic. Finally, apply the same material to the key loops, making any small adjustments if needed. Once you're happy with the materials and colors, switch back to the layout mode at the top. And that's it, our Bomb-Omb is fully colored and ready to go. Alright, let's finish up this tutorial by giving our Bomb-Omb a nice pose for a cool render. First we need to adjust the pivot point so we can rotate everything properly. Select the body, press Shift S and choose Cursor to Selection to move the 3D cursor to the center of the character. Now change the pivot point to 3D cursor. You can do this at the top of the viewport. Next, let's add some movement to make the pose look more dynamic. Select both the body and the fuse, then rotate them slightly on the X-axis to give the character a slight tilt. Now select the wind-up key and rotate it a little on the Y-axis to make it look more natural. For the feet we need to do a little bit of prep work before we can pose them. Go to the Modifier tab and apply the Mirror modifier on the feet and legs by hovering over it and pressing Ctrl A. Now go into edit mode, select one foot by pressing L, and separate it into its own object by pressing P, separate by selection. Repeat the same steps for the legs so that we can move them individually. When done, we can go and adjust the pose of the legs. Select one foot and rotate it slightly forward on the x-axis. And then select the other foot and rotate it slightly backwards to create a natural walking stance. Finally, move the whole character slightly up to give it a nice balanced look. And that's it, our Bomb-Omb is fully modeled, colored and posed, ready for a final render. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and found it helpful. If you have any questions or suggestions, feel free to leave them in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. Thanks for watching and see you next time.